Hey everyone, my name is Vin-Decision, and we are talking about Vin-Picks October 2022 in this session. Vin-Picks, if you don't know, is a sampler we put together, a 4-pack, that represents the best value, represents, or at least is a glimpse, a snapshot of the most relevant producers in the wine world. And we pick 4 of those each month and deliver them to you for 99.99, so $99.99 plus tax and shipping. So you basically get 4 bottles for under $100. And these are all wines that are meant to leave an impression, to exceed expectations, but also to teach you something. Some of these producers are classic, so they exist as benchmark expressions of the respective regions. Others are up and coming and ones you should pay attention to. So this is just a brief overview of what this month has lined up for you. The idea is to give you a little bit of info on each bottle as you dive into them using a few maps and pictures, but allow you to explore however you want. I used to be the wine director at a restaurant called Charlie Bird in New York City. Since then, I've created my own company called Vin-Decision, and I aim to deliver wine experiences to people in a way that is more friendly and accessible. So it's very easy to talk about wine, or at least find people that can talk about wine in a dry way, a way that doesn't make you want to drink any wine. I try to do the opposite. And so we won't talk about some of the real, I guess, complexities of winemaking here. We might eventually go into that, but this is just a quick overview of these bottles and some of my favorites. So each month, as I said, we present Vin-Picks, and the idea is 4 bottles every time. They can be just about anything, though I'm trained in a classic way. So some of the regions, let's say Burgundy, Rhone, Piedmont, those are some of my crutches. However, I'm very open-minded too. And so there will be generally a lot of old world, but there's going to be some new world too. All of these are meant to, in some way or another, spark your interest and hopefully get you on your own rabbit hole to explore some of these in further detail. So in this pack, we have 1 champagne, 1 white wine, and 2 red wines. So I'm going to start as I would start in a restaurant with the bubbles, and then we'll move to white and then the reds. And so we are starting with Jacquard, which is their mosaic bottling. And Jacquard is an old house formed around the 1960s. So they've been in the game for a while. They've never, to be fair, necessarily risen to the heights of, let's say, Dom Perignon or Krug, or even some of the smaller growers, let's say Pierre Peters or Burèche. However, they are this kind of household staple, if you will. They are always a house you can rely upon. They're a house that is generally not going to cost too much wherever you are in the world buying wine, and one that you always know what you're going to get. I find that's actually extremely important in a region like Champagne because there are a lot of variables. It might seem, if you're not familiar with Champagne or if you don't drink much Champagne, it might seem like this is pretty cut and dry. This is going to be bubbles. It's likely going to, or at least hopefully going to be, a sophisticated experience. That's, after all, when we have Champagne, and that's about it. The reality, though, is that Champagne can be a variety, a myriad of different styles. It might have a style like Extra Brut, which you might see on a label, that has little sugar and has a lot of acidity, or at least a lot of acidity is immediately present. It might be Brut, like this bottling, which has a moderate level of sugar, which is meant to balance the acidity. And when we say moderate level of sugar, I mean a fraction of what's in Coca-Cola. So we're still working with minute levels of sugar. This is just how they understand a system for which to gauge it off of. And then it can have actually a lot of sugar, a lot more, at least perceptible sugar. And so these different styles all contribute greatly to the overall product. And so if you have a champagne, for instance, that has too much acidity or it's not very well balanced, that can sometimes be off-putting, especially with what you're eating. or especially with what mood you're in, or especially where you are in the day. If you're trying to get lit, and then that acidity might really kind of push you in the right direction. If you're trying to be tame, that acidity might feel like an attack on your palate. So I tend toward the champagne houses that have a relatively moderate idea of this sugar to acid balance. Remember, sugar and acid are two friendly terms, where we'll go over a lot in Vin-Picks most likely. So many people I meet are afraid of sugar in their wine, yet in every other part of their life, sugar is abundant. And so it's not simple. It's just not fair for wine to not be allowed to have sugar when that sugar actually helps quell the acidity in a really pleasing way. And so most of your favorite wines, whether you know it or not, certainly have some degree of sugar in them. Some of them might have far more than you even think, and that's okay. So in champagne, and great champagne, I find I always want a little bit of sugar, and that's what this Jacquard has. To get on and give you a quick overview of what champagne is, it is not an easy area to understand in one sort of breath. And so to give you at least an idea of where it is on the map, we are all the way really in the northern limits of grape growing in France, which is in this map, this purple area. And this is a place where you are, the location dictates what the wine is called. This is really an old world phenomenon, though there are exceptions. But what happens, especially in France, is where you are, that location is what the wine is called. Thus, we are in Champagne, so the wine is called Champagne, and all the grapes for Champagne have to be grown in these limits. They can't, therefore, be grown, let's say, in the Loire Valley, and then be transported to Champagne, and they make and bottle them there. That is not called Champagne. Might taste like it. In fact, it might be made exactly the same. However, legally, it is not allowed to be called Champagne. So when we say Champagne, we are actually talking about this very specific area. In this area, they also need to abide by certain winemaking practices. These practices are largely pretty intensive. So it takes a lot of work to get these things done. And it also takes a lot of time. If you were to visit a champagne house or a champagne estate, you might go down into their extensive coves where they age everything and where a lot of this process occurs. That's all to not only uphold a fairly strict level of quality, but also to ensure the temperatures are correct. You don't want this all to be happening above ground where, let's say, it can get really hot and therefore ruin these wines in the process. So a lot goes into a bottle of champagne, which is why it generally costs a pretty penny. So to be able to include a bottle of champagne in Vin-Picks, which again is 4 bottles for under 100, is pretty insane. So we found this one, this Jacquard. It will impress anyone at the table. This is not going to be for those of you who are specifically looking to deep dive into grower champagne, which I hope we're eventually going to have. However, it is going to be a great reminder of what everyday champagne should be, in my opinion. The next wine is maybe my favorite wine of the bunch, and certainly the wine that I think a lot of people, especially on a restaurant, might ignore, but it is Domaine Weinbach. And Domaine Weinbach comes from Alsace, and this actually isn't that far away from Champagne when we look at the map. I mean, it's not going to be this place that is adjacent or right next to, but it is nearly at this sort of same outer northern limits of where grape growing can happen. Because again, when we're this cold, the grapes tend not to ripen to any degree of pleasurable palatability. And so here you have to be very careful to achieve that ripeness. And then there's certainly grapes that do better here and of course worse. Keep in mind, and one reason why I love these maps is because it gives us context, but see, Germany is right here. Nearly I mean, really not nearly, it is the neighbor of Alsace. And so a lot of that Germanic influence is very present in the wines. And when I say Germanic influence, one thing that comes to mind is, of course, Riesling. And that is very much a part of this wine. It's part of Alsace in general. Riesling and then Gewürztraminer are really the two main grapes here. So two white wine grapes. And they have a lot of tendencies that mimic and or mirror Germany. However, where a wine comes from, so its country of origin, of course, but its traditions, its local traditions, very much dictate what that wine will taste like. So it differs from Germany in a lot of different ways. It's very individual disposition on the map and in the world, but also because of its history, its people, its tradition. And so this bottle that is primarily Riesling, but this is a blend. So we only have about 40% Riesling. We also have some Sylvaner in here and some Auxerrois, and maybe some Muscat, and I'm sure maybe a few other grapes that didn't make it onto the label, but are still very present. All of those combined to make one of the more fascinating wines I've had recently. As we go into fall, this is a wine that I love to have on the table always. I mean, I'm thinking about buying at least a case, maybe 2 cases of this wine to put away. But I love having this wine because of its texture. That Riesling, which is the dominant grape, but again, only at 40%, that Riesling gives the wine a very nice backbone of acidity. So it cuts through a lot of fats. Let's say you have cheese on the table. Let's say you even have some kind of lighter poultry on the table. It's going to be able to cut through all that. And the other grapes really add a roundness to the wine. So you have 2 things happening at once. The more I get into the wine, the more I'm into and excited by textural wines. Not just, the ripping acid of, let's say, a dry German Riesling. These acid freaks love these wines. That is not me. I can't do that anymore. I love acid, but maybe not that kind. I like wines, though, that have a touch of that have a kind of nerviness, what we call nerviness to them, but also have these different layers that end up balancing the wine. And that is exactly what Domaine Weinbach does. If you've never heard of Alsace, or if you've never visited Alsace, it is a beautiful place. It's a mountainous place. So a lot of these vineyards are kind of on hillsides or terraced. There is a mountain range that dominates this area geographically. It's also a very cold region. As we saw on the map, it is the northern kind of limits of grape growing. So in the winter, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see vineyards covered with snow. This climate, though, really helps grapes to mature and grow in the right manner. You have those cooling times where the vines go to sleep. Of course, you're going to have warmer times too, as these vines and grapes need to ripen and develop. And so all of this, especially as global warming is becoming very much an issue for winemakers, or at least something they need to understand and grapple with, this becomes a place that is very interesting. That ripeness certainly comes out. But because of all of the grapes in here that have an inherent acidity, that ripeness really finds a lovely balance. So this wine, I'm telling you, probably the favorite of the 4. Was not expecting it myself, but figured we needed to put it in, and I'm very happy we did. The next wine is coming from Burgundy. Though I'll be the first to say that I think Burgundy train needs to kind of leave now because the pricing is so absurd and outrageous. This is a great example of a wine that still performs well in its price point. I mean, let's say all of these bottles are around the $25 price point in this price range that we're dealing with. They are, and that's absurd. $25 for red Burgundy normally means you should be suspect. That if someone were to try to sell that to you, like, okay, man, like what else is going on here? This bottle of Burgundy shows you that that's simply not true. You just have to look hard and in between the kind of more famous places. To give you an example of that, look at your label. You'll see Coteau Bourguignon. What that shows you is an appellation that we don't hear about often, right? That's a long word. You could also say Grand Ordinaire, or kind of like what translates to ordinary Burgundy. That's what it really used to be called, and now it has this fancier name because it's not really fair to call something just ordinary, I guess. And so now it has this larger name, and what that means is essentially it can be a melting pot of different things. You can put a lot of different grapes in here if you want. Oftentimes, you'll find these wines made primarily of Pinot Noir and Gamay as a blend too. And so producers can use this appellation, lean on it if they have outlying vineyards, if they have some kind of grapes or juice that is left over that they want to use and they never really fit in anywhere. If this kind of specific bottling didn't really make sense with the other ones. So this is kind of the stepchild of Burgundy, to be fair. However, sometimes you find these gems, and this is one of them. This producer's name is Joseph Roty, R-O-T-Y, and that's important because it is a historic and really kind of traditional domain when we talk about Burgundy. To give you an idea, we are nearly in the center of France, really closer to east of that center. So right here in this strip. In this strip, you'll find that you're clearly not connected to any water or very close to it, aside from rivers. Again, that will give you a continental, what we call a continental climate. And so the winters are often pretty harsh, where the summers are long and vibrant. The sun stays out till about 10:30, 11 p.m. at night, if not longer. And so that growing season is sort of perfect for grapes, provided nothing goes wrong. And that's a big provided, because a lot of things go wrong now. A lot of weird, erratic weather comes in, and all of a sudden you jump 10, 15 degrees in one night, which really messes up the grapes as they're developing. So Burgundy is a volatile growing region for sure, which means pricing and prices have gone up considerably. Not only a lot of this wealth has gone into Burgundy, and not necessarily has it done this to other regions, and it's really blown it up. So whereas maybe maybe even 3 years ago, I was buying a wine that cost about $25, $30 on a shelf. Today, that costs $55, $60, sometimes even more. Sometimes it even costs $500 to $700. There are those cases which wines, kind of ordinary wines, have become unicorns nearly overnight. So Burgundy is this wild place. It's really difficult to understand quality. And so you really have to rely upon your wine people or upon producers that you know and trust. And so all I'm trying to say is Joseph Roty is definitely one of those. And this is sort of an unbelievable value. It shouldn't exist. It is 100% Pinot Noir, despite that Bourguignon appellation, which allows Gamay. This is 100% Pinot Noir because they chose to make it like this. Again, this is a humble, honest estate where wines from here have never really followed the trends. They've always had a bit of a rustic side to them in the most pleasurable way. Because after all, when you drink a region, you don't want an imitation or a mimicry of somewhere else. You want to understand the identity of that region. And the identity of Burgundy, at least the sort of old school identity, was Pinot Noir, but in its sort of raw, though finesse-driven form. Those might seem like contradictions, and I guess maybe they are a little bit, but whenever you have Burgundy, you're always reminded of this descriptor, which is translated to the sauvage or savage. The savage is what we are talking about when we talk about a producer like Joseph Roty. So you have some of the oomph, the bold nature of Pinot Noir present in this wine. So the ageability is very much there. You have Pinot Noir that's a little bit darker hued than some of the others that exist, though by no means inky or anything like that. You have some power here, but some power that is more regal than anything else. This is a lovely kind of gateway to fall wine because it's going to hold up perfectly to something like pork chop. Certainly roast chicken, but think pork chop. At 100% Pinot Noir and 2018, you have a lot of things going on here. There's a lot of layers. You could even put this in your cellar for a few more years and it would age impeccably. It would impress a lot of people at the table. But we wanted to show you what it tastes like today so you can make that decision down the line. And this is one I'm really excited about and interested in. The last bottle we're talking about for this session is Presque Syrah. This is coming from Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara being one of the most important places, if I would say maybe the most important place in American wine culture today. It is very much the new Napa, but that is kind of a ridiculous term. And those times have almost already passed too, because winemakers who haven't already got in don't really have a chance to get in anymore. That's how well developed this region is. And now you see wines coming from California that don't necessarily have to fit that classic Californian paradigm that Robert Parker put out there. Remember that California has held its prestige for some time. It is part of the New World, where all these other wines are part of the Old World. And so California did not necessarily have the advantage or benefit of being around for centuries upon centuries, even millennia. California wine did not start until about 1769 in San Diego. And so throughout that relatively short history, keep in mind, California was hit by Prohibition in the 1920s-ish, and that really knocked out the market. So anything they gained up until then was essentially obliterated. And so they had to restart, more or less. And that didn't happen until about the 1950s, 1960s. You had the Judgment of Paris, of course, that pitted some of the best wines of France against California. And during that time, California won, which was a total underdog story. So California has been on the map for some time. However, California hasn't really come into their own, in my opinion, at least in terms of the possibilities of each region until more recently. A lot of California wine kind of followed a similar trend. And that's not to say there wasn't greats or there haven't been benchmarks for a long time. There have been a lot of benchmarks, but those are ones that generally only wine collectors know about. The general public often doesn't get to see those wines. So they might be pushed into this other category where a lot of these wines kind of taste the same and like, cool, it's bold, red, fruity, whatever. California is starting to ditch that and go for what they do best. And that is to showcase some semblance of terroir. And I find Santa Barbara does this really well, not only because the talent of people like, Justin Willett, who has been making wine there from 2005 and really putting his roots in the ground and showcasing what is possible there. But you also have a lot of interest from everyone else now. And so all of this talent is being pooled into one place, and it really elevates the region. This is a good thing. Maybe never before has so much great wine been coming out of Santa Barbara. So this is exciting. This wine we have is from Presque, and it's Syrah. Now, Syrah in California, I could name maybe 3 or 4 producers that I'd say, yes, buy it. And then there's a lot of other ones that I would say that you should or could ignore. So Syrah and California for me are a difficult relationship. And there are some great ones, of course, again, but I am hesitant when I come to these bottles. And so it really has to overperform. It has to kind of shake me up a little bit to catch my attention, which is not quite fair. But this bottle does that. Presque makes one of the most exciting Syrahs in the world, but certainly in California, because they go about it the right way. They have a Northern Rhone lens. So Northern Rhone is where we would find Syrah in France for the most part, other places too, but that's really where you're focusing on. This is right above where Châteauneuf-du-Pas made, etc. They have a Northern Rhone lens, but they maintain the identity of California. And that means they're not trying to be something or someone else. They are not totally throwing California out the door and saying, look, this is Syrah, and you probably can't tell where it is from, but it kind of tastes French, right? They're not doing that. California is still very present in this bottle, which is great. It's a wine that is surprisingly live. I'm guessing if you're drinking this or if you taste it, you're going to be kind of surprised. It's also a wine that perfectly performs with this savory, meaty tone, meets this fresh and fruity tone. This is my favorite part of Syrah. This is why I'm always hooked, because it does this contradiction, this juxtaposition so well. And it still becomes mesmerizing, enamoring even. And after all this time, I've drank thousands of bottles, and Syrah still does this. So let me know what you think. Again, take a look at the link below. You're going to find how to buy these wines. You'll find my email too. If you want to utilize it, let me know what you think. If you need help buying these wines, etc. But we're going to go through Grapes, the wine company. That's my retail partner. And we'll ship these out as soon as they are ready. Again, leave your comments below. If you like this, subscribe to the channel. There'll be many more of these. And if you do enjoy this content, let me know what else you're looking for. There will be more Vin-Picks videos, that's for sure. But I'm interested in other wines too. Some of my favorite wines are those that leave a memorable impression no matter how much they cost. Today, it's really not that hard to find a $1,000 bottle of white Burgundy. It's not. There's a lot of places. Winesearcher.com, you're going to find a lot. What's much harder is to find a bottle that costs $25 or $30 that belongs in your cellar. And after you age it for 5 years, you open it, put it on a table with some other greats of the world, and it can compete, if not completely devour the competition. Those are the wines I'm interested in. Those are the wines that are going to be on this channel. Thanks for your time. Remember to hit the link. This is one of the better deals in the wine world. It's not a wine club because that stuff is normally BS. This is something that will change and continue to change. Thanks for your time. Make sure you follow on Instagram. That's Vin-Decision, like indecision, but with a V as in Victor, Vin-Decision. See you on the next time. Ciao.